Always trust.
Israel's war on Gaza has left tens of thousands of people dead and entire communities destroyed. After relentless bombing, what's left of its medical facilities are the last refuge for the wounded, many of them women and children. In this chaos, doctors face an impossible choice: flee or stay and try to save lives. Like many other health workers, Dr. Ahmed Mokhallalati chose to stay. While his family fled to safety, he remained in hospitals under siege, enduring airstrikes, severe shortages of medical supplies, equipment and essential goods, and overwhelming numbers of patients. He's one of many unsung heroes who've kept Gaza's healthcare system going during its darkest hours, until there was no other choice but to leave. Today, just over 1 year since the war started, we reflect on the physical, mental and emotional toll on Gaza's medical staff and how their experiences have shaped their mission. Dr. Ahmed Mokhallalati talks to Al Jazeera. Dr. Ahmed Mokhallalati, thank you very much for talking to Al Jazeera. Doctor, please tell us a little bit about yourself first and what made you decide to move from the UK to Gaza.
I'm originally from Gaza. I was born outside Gaza, Ireland, where my father was doing his general surgery training in Ireland. So since the beginning of my life, I really wanted to follow the steps of my late father, who moved from Ireland to Jerusalem and then to Gaza. And he started to improve the health system there. He was the one who founded the 2 medical schools in Gaza and a lot of work on the specialization of the doctors. So it was someone I really seen in my life who had done really big impact on the health system of Gaza. So I wanted to follow. That's something. The other thing, it was always my dream going to Gaza and being back to my homeland. I always say, there is a poem in Arabic say, وَكَثَّرْةُ الْأَوْطَانِ تَعْنِي قِلَّةَ الْوَطَنِ. So if you have a lot of homelands, then you don't have a homeland. And I felt always being away from Gaza since being 17-year-old, that I never felt the feeling of being in my homeland. So my dream, together with my family, to go back to Gaza and then to start proper plastic surgery services there, and then start the plastic surgery training program. So all over my training, that was my target. It was always clear to me that I want to end up in that place.
And then you decided to move back to your homeland.
Exactly.
But that was just a few months before the war started.
Yeah, in February 23, I've decided to move to Gaza. Relocating to Gaza is not an easy thing. So being in London, in the schools there, in the proper health system there, totally relaxed, let me say, in all kinds of life. Then moving to Gaza, where it's under full siege. I know that people would say the siege started earlier, but it was still siege. The borders are hardly opened. Moving there. But the other part of this one, there was no board-certified plastic surgeon in Gaza. They never had proper services there. So it was, again, a big challenge.
Big challenge.
And on the other side, it was a big dream to achieve and something in front of you that you can do something.
And amid that challenge, October 7 happened. And tell us, what have you been doing on that particular day?
On October 7th, I had a really complex case the day before. So I was preparing myself at 7 a.m. in the morning, going and seeing the patient. During that time, we started to hear the news saying that there is something major happening. We didn't know what's happening, but usually we have emergency response levels within the hospital. So they started by, gradually increasing the level of emergency until we knew exactly that it was really serious. And then we reached the maximum level of emergency, which is like working every other day. So half of the hospital capacity had to work that day.
Are you talking about the days or hours before the October 7 attacks? This situation that you just described, this state of emergency?
So
or after the attacks?
So I'm talking about after the attack. They activated that. But before the attack, it was an ICRC system. So the ICRC were the one to put the emergency plan for Gaza together with the Ministry of Health. So it was a really good plan. And gradually, so I'm talking that it was gradually activated on the 7th of October from 7 o'clock in the morning till early afternoon, where we started to get hundreds of casualties coming to the hospital. And that's the time where we got around 500 patients within half an hour coming to the hospital with total collapse of the system at that time. It took us a few hours to be able to just restand again and being able to deal with these patients and just to get everything done, let me say, properly. And we had to move many patients to the wards upstairs. We had to get everyone from the ward and the theaters going back to emergency department or going there to try to fix the really, really difficult situation there.
But this was something very serious, but there is no comparison between this situation that you have just described and between the phase when the hospital itself became the target.
Exactly. So what I wanted to, just to tell that al-Shifa was open to everyone. That's one point. The other point that if anyone wants to check, they have the possibility of taking videos before, okay, and of sure they could have released these videos or something saying what's there before. So that's what I want to say, that we were totally safe, totally open to everyone. And one of the very important things about Shifa being like kind of landmark of the resilience of the Palestinians. So whoever comes to visit Gaza, even politicians, even people talking about agriculture or something with any of international organization, they come and see Shifa. The very really interesting thing about this was happening in Gaza. So I'm in the hospital, and I worked in Qatar, in Australia, in London. I've seen the people there. I know the hospital is the total safe place. I never thought of the hospital being a threatened, for you. The other important point that the hospitals were targets from the beginning. So they said their victory is just reaching Shifa Hospital, which made everyone really worried that they will attack us. Few days after the war, our Dr. Midhat Saydan, plastic surgeon, was bombed half an hour after going back from the hospital to his home, and he was killed with 30 of his family members. So we realized...
So that was a sign for you.
Exactly. And Midhat was really early in that one. And then we started seeing people being bombed or targeted immediately after leaving the hospital. And I remember this was obvious with at least 30 or 40 at the very beginning of the war, seeing them. And I remember Dr. Marwan Abu Saada, who's the General Director of the International Affairs in the Ministry, and he was in the Shifa Hospital operating theater, and we heard of one of the nurses being targeted literally half an hour after reaching home. He was with us overnight.
Was that for you a sign enough to know that something is going to happen in the hospital itself?
So at that time, we were sure, okay, that hospitals, health professionals are targets.
So what happened to the hospital? What did they do when they reached the hospital and they began bombarding the hospital? Tell us about those hours and days.
So briefly, Shifa Hospital was announced to be the target from the beginning. So on the 10th of November, they started the actual targeting of the hospital by bombing the hospital 4 times overnight. So they bombed the women's hospital twice, the outpatient department, and the emergency department, the tents in front of the emergency department overnight. And we had 14 people killed and dozens injured at that attack. And at that point, the hospital had 2,200 patients, 50,000 civilians sheltering within the hospital, and around thousands of the medical staff. That was a bad sign that the hospital, targeting has started actually, and this is a sign that you have to leave. During this process, I remember Muhammad, who is an 8-year-old child, had burn of 40%. This child was attacked with his family. He lost his parents, his father. He lost 2 of his siblings. And he was in the hospital with his mother, his other injured sister, Ula, okay, and him. Because he's a burn patient, we couldn't get him space with his sister, so he was in a separate place with us. And then his sister was in another building. So when the attack happened, the mother, who was really in very bad situation, traumatized, psychologically unstable because of what she has seen, she lost everything. At that point, she couldn't know what to do. And she was crying. And then all of a sudden, she decided to leave the hospital, trying to save her other daughter, who's for her the last survivor, together with Muhammad, and leaving Muhammad in the hospital. Muhammad was almost, recovering. He was in a very good situation. 2 days later, Muhammad starting to deteriorate. He lost hope the moment he realized his family left him. Okay, and he was really critical, and he died a few days after that.
Ahmed, tell us, how did you, as doctors and as human beings, how did you cope with this situation? And also the other part of my question is, what, medicine, the facilities, the things you need to do, the surgeries, the medical, staff itself, everything was in a mess. Describe this mess to us.
So when we started, operating and doing surgeries, with 7th of October, they closed all the borders, so nothing was coming to Gaza. So whatever you have in your stores would be what you have to work with. That's one thing. The other thing, they divided Gaza soon in few parts. So we were unable to get the things, between the stores. The third thing, they've targeted the stores of the Ministry of Health, which are really big stores. And I remember even targeting the stores of the other organizations. So we started with very bad situation. And, we lost a lot of things in these stores which have been targeted. The other thing is, you don't have a lot of things. You have to prioritize patient care because of lack of supplies, because of lack of spaces. So this, Shifa Hospital is 700 bed capacity hospital. It had to deal with like 2,200 patients. So that's really hard in all means. The ICU capacity used to be 20 bed capacity. We had to expand it to 70 capacity. So we had taken decisions, which is really something for me, traumatizing me till now, that we decided that we can't save any patient with burn above than 50%. That was really hard because you should give them a trial. But I remember the discussion between me, the chairman of ICU's chairman of emergency department, that we are lacking everything. And I remember him telling me, in the old days, I used to get you one ICU doctor to be able to get this patient surviving. And now I don't have the capacity.
Tell us about what you did as a plastic surgeon. I mean, did you even have the tools? And what were the surgeries that you were able to do during the war for those victims of the war?
So you work mainly with the burn patients. So as I told you, we have taken the difficult decision to prioritize the patients only with less than 50% burn. The other thing is the ones with 20-30% burn, they need regular, we call it debride, meaning cleaning the wounds, removing the dead tissues, and then until we reach a level, it's really clean, and then we cover it. In this war, interestingly, they were using new weapons. They keep trying new weapons on the people of Gaza. So in this war, different to each other war, there was very big percentage of burn patients. All patients were coming with burn. So if the patient would survive the shrapnel, the injury to the head, to the abdomen, they will die from the burn. So there was hundreds of patients of burn. The other thing, we do the reconstructive surgery, which is when you have bad crushed injury to the limbs, we try to save the limb by covering it. So the orthopedic surgeons would fix the bone, and we deal with the lost soft tissue, which is our other big, portion in this war. The third thing is we call it skin loss, muscle loss. Because of these explosive injuries, the patients would lose really big part of their bodies, skin and muscles. And this needs a lot of cleaning, a lot of wound care. And
did you have enough tools for this?
No. So we started by, in the first 2 weeks, we started to lose most of the antiseptic solutions. So we had to use the soups. So it might look weird, but we have to go and use the soup. We went to the supermarket starting by the washing soup, and then it ran out of the market, and then we went to the vinegar together. And I remember being in the operating theater mixing vinegar with soup with a little bit of betadine, because I can't use all of the betadine. The other thing, we usually wash the wounds with a clean, sterile water, something like salty water. So we ran out of that one, so we're using the tap water to clean the wounds. The other thing, sugar, I heard that sugar can be used in very remote areas, but I never had experience in using sugar. So I was checking as a dressing tool.
Is it medically approved to do it?
So they use it in the war times, in the really difficult times. But for me,
as a last resort.
It works, to be honest, in the wounds when you have nothing. So it happened many times that I have to do something beyond my capacity.
Did you have to do surgeries without anesthesia?
So most of the anesthesia we used was one single medication anesthesia, which is not enough at all. So it's usually that the anesthesia is more than one medication. So we didn't have this fancy. The other thing, in the last 2 weeks, the Israelis started by targeting the oxygen station. So we had to do anesthesia without oxygen. So the deep anesthesia will let the patient sleep fully. Then they need support by oxygen. Not having oxygen means you can't give anesthesia. So I remember the last 2 weeks in a Shifa hospital working without anesthesia, a little bit of, just, we call it very light anesthesia, and then the patients were screaming all the time, but you feel your hands tightened. One of the other things which I'll never forget, during that really critical time, it was 70 patients and dead bodies arrived to the hospital. We had no CT scan working in the south of Gaza at that time. I'm talking about something about April, where late April, beginning of May, where they started gradually the operation in Rafah. So we had this number of casualties. We had patients with head injury and abdomen injury. Though there was no CT scan, we were sure that there is injury because the eye was dilated. And then we had to work out this blindly. So we opened few holes in his head. That's the way you treat with, the hematoma. And we couldn't find the bleeding. And I remember myself sitting outside the tent that day and literally crying in all means that, is it like we reached this level in 2024, that we have hundreds of casualties coming and there is no CT scan, there was no ICUs, and everyone is watching, everyone's doing nothing.
What happened to the foreign doctors? You talked about lots of delegations that came to the hospital before the war. During the war, did you see any foreign doctors there, and what was their situation?
So the first 3 months, they didn't allow anyone to come into Gaza, and then they gave the first permission to the ICRC hospital to start supporting the European Gaza hospital in the south, with them only being in the hospital, not moving out of the hospital at all. And then gradually in late January, we started to receive international delegates coming to Gaza and supporting us. And it was a really good time from January.
But that was before the second attack on the hospital.
On the Shifa hospital.
Let me go on to the second attack.
Yeah, so
were you there?
In the end of November, so the attack and the siege on Shifa ended on the 24th of November. And the day before that, they intentionally and deliberately bombed every critical or vital thing in the hospital. So they went to the the electrical control room. They bombed it with a vac bomb, so everything collapsed. They went to the, water supplies. They bombed everything. And they went to the oxygen stations. They bombed them again, the generators. So they made all their efforts for the Shifa hospital not to work at all.
Describe for us the moment you came in contact face-to-face with the Israeli troops. Did they enter the hospital?
So the first week was, they were outside, and then the last, so when we tried to bury the bodies, so, we had 250 dead bodies in the hospital with really all the bad smell of that, all the dogs and cats coming from all over the area. We kept calling WHO, UN, ICRC, please come and take the dead bodies. We can't live with this number of dead bodies in the hospital, especially not having electricity to run the fridge, of the mortuary. So, and then no one replied. So we decided on our own
to go out,
to just bury them in a mass grave in front of the surgical specialty building. And we started, doing this thing.
That was when they came.
And then the next day, the troops went in the hospital. So the tanks were outside at that moment. And then at that time, on the 14th of November, they have decided to come in and they have stolen all of the dead bodies from the hospital. And then it was still us being in the buildings, the troops are outside. And they were bombing everywhere, checking everything.
Did you fear for your life?
So it was more serious a few days later when they said there is another safe corridor for the people to leave. At that point, most of the staff and the patients left. And we were left with 350 patients, only 7 or 8 staff. And then most of the people, the civilians, left the hospital. The same day, the international organization came and they were supposed to evacuate the hospital. But they said, guys, there is no road to walk in, there is no ambulances, we're not evacuating the hospital soon.
When did you decide that this is very risky for yourself and you left?
I don't think I've decided this at all.
You didn't decide?
I didn't decide.
So how did you exit the place?
So I stayed there, and the same day they asked for one of the doctors, Dr. Marwan, to go with them. So he went downstairs. They used him as a human shield, and they used him to open all the doors of the hospital, and they were bombing in front of him. It was a very difficult experience to him.
So what happened to you?
So he came back and he said, guys, they are now very, very aggressive, okay? And then they wanted someone else to go downstairs and talk to them. And it ended up being me, the guy to go downstairs. You know, at that point, I never felt scared.
Did you have any interaction with the soldiers?
Yeah, I just
Personally?
That day,
What did they say?
I never felt scared at all. I went to the the lower basement floor of the surgical specialty area. Again, totally dark, more than 30 of the troops there with the guns pointing at you, with the light coming from the guns. And they started asking me about the tunnels, the command center, and all this stuff. And I said, guys, do you think we as doctors are supposed to know this thing? What are you talking about? It's totally civilian place. This is hospital. And it was for me the more shocking thing that how the whole world allowed the Israelis to get in the hospital, interrogating us and arresting us in the hospital, being totally civilians. And I remember me talking to the officer saying, you know that this place is only for civilians. There is no single gun used against you.
At that particular moment, did you feel some fear that you might die?
It was, and he told me, okay, I'm just telling you that whoever stayed in this place will be either killed or arrested. Maybe we will not arrest you here because all the media is watching al-Shifa, but the moment you leave al-Shifa hospital, you will be killed.
Did they spare you because you have a foreign passport?
I don't think at that time, okay, the people on the ground, I mean the soldiers, they care about these things. So they kill the people on the ground, they do whatever. And he was literally like, in all means, just threatening me. But he wanted some informations from me, and he wanted someone to be like a messenger between them and us, because there are like 700 people inside. But the way they were talking, and I remember him saying, we bombed your family and we heard they survived. And actually they bombed my family when they were in my in-law house. And they survived, luckily. And I said, really? You bombed them?
So they know your family?
Yeah, he asked me, and he said they survived, we just killed them the next time. The moment I came to know that they know exactly the other circumstances, and they just bombed the family and they survived, they came from under the rubble, I called my wife and I said, please leave Gaza, okay? We were lucky having the option to leave, being like holding foreign passport, but most of the Gazans did have this one. And she left in late November when I was under this arrest. So it was literally arresting, interrogating, threatening me.
1 year later, now looking back at those events and what happened during that, since that time, a lot happened. How do you see that? How do you remember the whole thing now? And how do you assess where things, are at the moment?
So it's two things. Personally, I believe we are all traumatized. And I had a really difficult moment, okay, crying like I've never had in my life. I cried without control. I cried seeing the number of amputations, okay. Remembering the kids, like, Wafa is one of the patient, 8-year-old patient. We had to amputate her limb from the hip level, and her parents refused. And I remember saying, it's like totally lost. There is no skin, there is no muscle. She will die from infection. And they said, no, we don't want. Someone told us that she might survive. And I knew, I said, listen, I need Wafa. I don't need her limb, because she will die. And I remember me explaining and trying to convince the family of amputation. And then I collapsed all of a sudden. I started crying. And then I realized how much deeply we are all traumatized in this aspect. The other question, let me tell you where it's going. So the other big picture of this one is, targeting the health system on its own. So for example, if al-Shifa had someone inside, they didn't find them, why did they destroy al-Shifa? Why did they destroy the building? Why the oxygen station? So they didn't want the hospitals to survive and to work. The other thing, when we moved out of al-Shifa, they were destroying all the north hospitals. And the moment the ceasefire started, all the north hospitals were out of service. They were all not working. So it was totally targeting the system. The other thing, we had, again, after the ceasefire, which is like January, February, March, they started targeting the southern hospital, mainly Nasser Hospital in the south, and then they went to the other hospitals. So let me just say something. What they wanted to do, they wanted to leave Gaza without health system, and they allowed the international organizations and field hospitals to get their hospitals in Gaza. And here what happened. For example, one of the hospitals would come, the American, the British, the ICRC one, or whatever, the German one, whatever hospitals there, they would asked to be linked to the governmental hospital. Like, can we start by being near EGH? The Israeli side would say, no, you should be near the beach side, and you shouldn't be linked to anyone. You shouldn't talk to the Ministry of Health at all. And we ended up of the hospitals destroyed gradually, the governmental one, and the field hospitals giving the chance to improve and to have their structure built. And what they meant to Gaza to be relying on the field hospital structure rather than the governmental one, and then killing all of these governmental hospitals. And here is the point. The field hospitals, they have to listen to the Israelis. I remember the American hospital being in Khan Yunis, and then in one day, they decided to move to Rafah because the Israelis said, leave Khan Yunis. So these field hospitals were not that reliable. They had to listen to the Israeli side. And you know what's this aggressive, just occupation, using all these terrifying, structures of destroying the health system, they allowed the field hospital to get in, but never allowed them to have supplies. So none of these hospitals were giving permission to get supplies. So they have to rely on the Ministry of Health supplies, which is already very limited. So all these hospitals were taking the medications, the gauze, the consumables from the other NGOs, which was before in Gaza, I mean the MSF or like the other ones, or they would take it from the Ministry of Health. So it's meant for the system to collapse fully. I think they tried everything to destroy the system. The system is still live, is still functioning. Maybe it's injured, maybe it's like it has lost a lot, but the people resilience is something unbelievable. The Gazan people are rebuilding the system. Now we are back to the hospitals being in charge of most of the health system. Now they are able to treat the patients with very limited resources, I agree with you, with very limited personnel. Many of the people were targeted. They were targeting the highly specialized doctor. Losing, for example, a nephrologist, who was a kidney specialist doctor, would cost you 20 years, to rebuild, a specialist doctor. And that
I understand they have killed about 500
of the medical staff, but 80 of them were specialist doctors in really high specialties where we are lacking. Now, for example, the histopathology specialty is totally lacking. They killed the 4 histopathologists in Gaza. The same thing is happening to the orthopedic surgeons. The same thing is happening to the plastic surgeons. They killed 2 plastic surgeons out of 6. So it just, we are losing a lot over the time. But again, we try to help the system to just, to grow again and just to, again, be able to stand up and help the people.
Dr. Ahmed Mokhallalati, thank you very much for talking to Al Jazeera.
Thank you very much. Good luck.